Hello, today I'm going to show you how to write brilliantly using 8 pieces of advice from my favourite writer. So let's imagine you've got this incredibly boring photograph. That is possible. The 2017 exam had a really tedious photo of, I can't remember, people on a bus of some sort. It may have been in colour, but in my memory it was black and white. It was tedious. But we're going to rescue ourselves from that tedium with the master, Kurt Vonnegut. Look him up. He's a fabulous, fabulous writer. I'm going to take you through these 8 pieces of advice using the story or description that I've written. And if you're curious, by the way, in my next video I'm going to show you why you can write a description which is exactly like a story, but the examiner will mark it as a description if you want it as a description, or as a video if you as a story if you want it as a story. So look out for that video next. Okay, let's leap in. So I've got this planning technique which you should know by now. Zoom out, motif, zoom in, motif, zoom out, motif. Each one is a separate camera angle, and when I'm doing each one I'm going to try and meet as many of these rules as I can. So let's check out the beginning of the story or description. The V followed its normal trajectory, the lead swapping as though by telepathy in a strange choreography which had developed over millions of years without planes. Perhaps why the lead bird did not notice the Airbus rising towards it. Perhaps why the flock followed blindly, faithful to the goose in front, as the engines rose to meet them like a greeting on a warm summer's day. So how have I followed the rules? Well, I reckon I've done 8, 1, 4, 5, 6 and 7. Let's have a look. 8. Give your readers as much information as possible without explaining. So you know this plane is probably going to crash, and the clue was that the flock of geese is flying here and the Airbus is rising to meet it. You know that you're not wasting the reader's time because you don't explain that this is going to happen. You let the reader work it out from the details that you give. There is no character in it, so not number 2, but every sentence tells you how these the flock and the Airbus are coming together, and you should also have picked up why the birds don't notice that. They're all following the bird in front, and so they don't notice it. The collision becomes inevitable. Be a sadist. Well, you can probably work out that the geese are all going to get slaughtered. I'm not going to describe that, okay? That's not what he means. Don't put blood and guts in it, but he means have an element of cruelty. And here, all my characters want to live, and that life is going to be denied to them. That's the cruelty. And it begins with the killing of these geese. And then write to please just one person. I have in mind just one student in my classroom as I'm writing this, because I'm writing it in the book on the board while they're practicing their own exam writing. Okay, so this is something I wrote in live time under exam conditions, and so I had this one student in my class who really tries, and he doesn't always understand if you tell, like most of us. If you just tell us something, like, what does that mean? But if you show, oh, right, now I get what Mr. Salles means. So you'll see that in a minute. And I had this one boy in my class in my mind here. Okay, and let's leap to the second paragraph. At the window, Lisa sat cradling her new guitar. She was 8 years old and going to Nashville to join her father at last. He had given her this red guitar as a present, and a promise that he would teach her to play like an angel. Her eyes turned to the window, registering the silent disaster as the birds met the engine on her left-hand side. Something was wrong with this picture, and she thought she heard the guitar begin to play. So here I've followed every single rule I claim. Let's go back and see if this is true. Right, well, there's no description that takes us from the outside into the inside. There isn't a journey that does that. It's just straight away. There's no time wasted. The character, of course, that we want to root for is Lisa, and we want to root for her because she's desperate to see her dad. She's only 8 years old. She's got this present she's excited about. Every character should want something. Well, I've just covered that in number 2. Every sentence has got to reveal something about the character or the action. I think every sentence told you about the character there. Start as close to the ending as possible. So here I'm not actually going to describe the whole crash and the moments during the crash. My ending is going to be as the flock of geese have gone into the engine and caused it to stop working, or the engines, and the reader is then going to infer the ending will then happen after that. The plane will crash after that. I don't need to describe all of that because the reader already knows. Obviously, I'm being a sadist here. I'm creating a character who we desperately want to survive. She's young and innocent. You know, we can always expect parents to sacrifice themselves for their children, but seeing a child die or knowing that they're going to die is much more moving. So you're being sadistic that way. Again, no blood or guts. Who am I writing for here? Well, now I'm starting to write for myself, actually. I'm just starting to enjoy it. And you can see how there's enough information for us to really want that character to live, but to know that they won't. Okay, in this paragraph you should be getting the idea, so I'm not going to go through each of those all the way through, but I am going to pay particular attention to 8 and 4. The stewardess with the blonde hair and the tired eyes, fed up of passengers asking her question after question, trip after trip, felt it first, as though she were a Jedi Knight feeling a disruption in the Force. She smiled, realizing that her boyfriend would be surprised at the Star Wars reference, but something was wrong. This wasn't turbulence. There was a disruption in the Force. So what I really like about this writing is that we do feel for the stewardess here, but not quite as much as the girl. Obviously she's older, but she's also a bit more cynical here. However, we start to like her because she is suddenly at this moment of death starting to use these very nerdy, boyish Star Wars references in her own mind. And it's like a turning point in her relationship with her boyfriend. We can see that she's getting closer to him, and there's irony involved there, isn't it? Now we start to care about her because she's getting closer to him in her mind, but actually she's also going to die. So that comes back to 8 and 4. Give the readers as much information as possible without explaining. Yeah, so you've managed to infer this relationship, and every sentence reveals something about her character or her relationship with her boyfriend there. Okay, now I want to show you a developing skill, okay? So for your revision, you need to write under exam conditions. You must do that. You can't just sit down and say, I'll write a piece of description and I'll make it as brilliant as possible, because you won't learn so much from that. You need to write it under exam conditions and then evaluate it and then make it as brilliant as possible. Okay, so what's happened here is I have violated rules 8 and 4, where I'm telling the reader too much and not every sentence is telling me about the character or the action. So I'll show you here. In slow motion, the theme tune played. Dum 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 de dum dum de dum. An image of black boots and a black helmet appeared. Now, given what I've just said about Star Wars, that is enough to suggest death. So we've got the black boots and the black helmet. You really know death is coming, but I've told the reader too much in red. Instantly she knew the symbol for what it was. She suddenly realized why he was called Darth, and I'm listening here to the word Darth and thinking, oh, that sounds a lot like death. That's not a coincidence, that's done on purpose. A short syllable away from total blackness. Well, of course it's not a syllable away, because Darth and death are both one syllable long. So I should have written a phoneme away, individual units of sound, but I didn't do that because I had a particular reader in mind, okay? So all this stuff in red is there to model for my students what I was trying to do symbolically in my writing, because they're not grade 8 and 9 writers. In fact, this class are not really grade 7 writers either. It's complicated. I only teach them once a week. But it doesn't work perfectly. It's good writing, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't work perfectly because it breaks those rules. It tells the reader too much. So when I'm redrafting, I'm going to get rid of the stuff in red because I don't need it. Okay, exactly the same here, and hopefully you'll spot why I don't need the red stuff as we read it. Bart was playing on his phone again. At 16, he knew better than to have the volume turned up, so that the middle-aged couple next to him could hear his appalling music leaking out of his ears in a slow trickle that had built up to a flood, drowning them both in unexpressed anger as the flight wore on. How the music had droned. Well, I don't need that. I've already expressed how the music's been making her angry. The wife saw the geese first, and some part of her brain, the reptilian part she knew, suddenly kicked in. Well, I don't need that because I'm going to see it kick in. Anger rose in her like fire. The anger rose in her already tells us that. I'm getting rid of like fire because I've got a better simile here, like petrol thrown on a fire, and flames of rage strobed the back of her skull. I don't need huge and overwhelming because I know that they're overwhelming if they're I'm describing them inside her skull, flaming the back of them, strobing the brain. So I don't need that. It's extra information that's just there to show off. So you get the idea. Don't put in stuff that you don't need in order to explain the plot or the character. And then the same towards the end of my story. I'm not going to read all this bit out to you. You probably saw it in the other video. Because I needed to get my godlike view, that was part of the plan, I started with this idea of God. Who was it that was gazing down silently at the scene? And does God care is what I had in my mind. Now, this is really important because I tell my students, look, writing is thinking. And so I don't just think, I just write, whatever it is. Now, once I've written that, it gives me new ideas that I write about. And check it out down here. The clouds look down here at the end with indifference. Well, that already creates the idea that perhaps God doesn't care. It's only the clouds that are looking, and if the clouds represent God, well, he's indifferent. You know, he's created us but just left us to it, which is why tragedies happen. Now, the point of that is, that's given me the good idea. By starting with the obvious one, I've got to a good idea. So I can just cross that bit in red out. I don't need it. And so just to re-emphasize that point, writing is thinking. Yeah, and when you write something that's no good, it leads to a new idea which is better. And then you can ditch the old ideas and get rid of it. Practice that by being ruthless with your stories or with your descriptions. Now we nip to the end, and here I've followed all the rules. It's really important, especially to make the readers care about your character at the end, which is why I've returned to Lisa with her guitar, because that's who we were most sympathetic towards, and that's who we're going to think about as the plane crashes and she dies. Now, finally, I want to draw your attention to a couple of things where you include details which don't tell you what's going to happen, and therefore you might say don't enhance the plot. But I'll show you how they do advance the plot. So in seconds here, the entire flock was gone. Well, I might argue, and I've got to get rid of that because it's irrelevant. We've already seen the flock hitting the engine earlier in the story. But the reason this is important is the symbolic aspect. Every single goose has been killed, and that asks us to connect this as readers to what's going to happen to everybody on the plane. Oh, everybody is going to be killed. There's going to be no survivors. Okay, so that's a symbolic way of making all your details work. So again, the stewardess turns towards Lisa. So she sees Lisa lifting her guitar. Well, actually, she doesn't have to be there at all. I could get rid of that, couldn't I? It doesn't advance the plot. But it does, because I want her to notice the flash of red, because red obviously is symbolic of danger, And I mentioned right at the beginning that the guitar was red, so the reader again is having that idea of danger and death reinforced. Why have I got this at all? You might say, well, you know, if I didn't include this last paragraph, we already know from the clouds looked on sightlessly without care that the aeroplane's going to crash. So why do I need to focus on Lisa? Well, obviously I need to focus on Lisa to give us much more sympathy. But I've also, whoops, let me just undo that. I've also focused on Lisa getting her guitar out for the very first time, because that's going to connect with the character even more. She's looked forward to keeping this guitar to see her dad and open it with him for the first time. It's his gift. And then you've got this tragic irony, obviously, that the first time she opens it is also the last time. And that, again, is a way to bring us back to this idea of death while making us totally sympathise with her. So, hopefully you can see how Kurt Vonnegut will come to your rescue. Please go and read some of his books. They are fantastic. Start with Slaughterhouse-Five, that's my favourite. Or don't. You know, just subscribe to get more videos on how to become an amazing writer. Not just to pass your exams, but actually to enjoy writing. Good luck. Thank you for watching.